The application of CAR-T cell therapy in solid tumors has been fraught with historical obstacles. In simplest terms, it's been hard to encourage CAR-T cells to migrate into tumors, and equally, if not more difficult, to keep them alive long enough to go about their work killing tumor cells. Among the challenges, CAR-T cells face a gauntlet of immunosuppressive cells surrounding most tumors, intent on taking them out before the work begins. It's a tall order, but Dr. Amit Kumar is undaunted. Dr. Kumar is CEO at Anixa Biosciences, a clinical stage biopharma company focused on treating and preventing breast and ovarian cancers by way of its development of cancer vaccines and novel CAR-T cell therapies. I'm Matt Pillar. This is the Business of Biotech, and Dr. Kumar is here with me today to share his optimism. Dr. Kumar, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt, for having me.
It's my pleasure. I'm glad you could come along for the ride and join us for the conversation. I've got a whole bunch of questions for you about what you're doing there, the work you're doing at Anixa, but I want to begin by talking a little bit about you and what drives you and where you came from. So I'm curious about your career intentions coming out of Caltech with a Ph.D. in chemical physics, doing your postdoc work in chemistry at Harvard. What were your kind of intentions with that? It's an interesting background to wind up in a cell therapy leadership position.
Well, I finished my PhD. I did my PhD at both Stanford and Caltech, and my intent was initially to become a professor. So I went to Harvard. I was lucky enough to get a position there for my fellowship. Unfortunately, I didn't like the cold in Boston, so I decided to come back to the Bay Area. I invented a technology at Harvard, which is now known as soft lithography, which is something that's become very broadly used. I think almost every university, every research university has someone that's doing soft lithography research now. And that technology was useful for a particular application for which a startup company in the Bay Area was recruiting me. And so I chose to go down that path. That startup company was in the biotech sector. And since that time, I've been working in biotech as a scientist, an executive, investor, et cetera, for the last 25 years or so.
Yeah, that's cool. And so that biotech journey has kind of led you into a number of different industries. I noticed that among the companies that you founded or chaired over the course of your career are company in the energy sector. So you applied some biotech chops to bio chops to a company in the energy sector. What was the inspiration behind that?
I've actually been involved in a number of companies in the energy sector. My PhD at Caltech was focused on solar cells, photovoltaics. So very much energy focused and not biotech, actually. And so during my career in biotech, I've been involved with a number of energy companies, one of which is a company called Ascent Solar, which is located in Colorado. And the company I think you're referring to is a company called Geofossil Fuels, which was focused on hydrocarbon energy. That company was an interesting company with interesting technology. We were trying to develop bacteria, so genetically engineered bacteria that would go into oil wells and release a lot of the very thick and viscous oil that never gets out. A lot of people don't know this, but in a typical oil well, only about anywhere from 10% to maybe at the max about a third of the oil ever gets extracted. The remaining material is very viscous, often tar-like, but very valuable if it could be removed. And so the idea here was that rather than drill more holes, let's just go to existing oil wells and try and remove that existing carbon by using genetically engineered bacteria that would go into those oil wells, live in these very extreme conditions, and for lack of a better word, liquefy the tar-like oil. And so we had genetically engineered a number of very useful microorganisms to do that. But the dynamics of the oil industry are very complex, and I ended up moving forward and going back into more traditional biotech, which is what I'm doing here at Anixa now.
Yeah, into biopharma. You know, it's interesting, like that kind of that path. Both those fields just have an incredible potential impact on society. Are you partial then to the biopharma aspect of biotech versus perhaps some of the work you've done in the energy space?
I think so. I mean, they're both very important fields. The biopharma field hits home a little bit because all of us have had to deal with illness and cancer within our families and friends. And as you know, when someone within your family is diagnosed with difficult disease like illness, like cancer, it affects not only that individual, but pretty much everyone in that orbit, in that person's orbit. It affects, the person's ability to work. It affects society in ways that we don't always measure. And it's very emotional. It's something that often results in an outcome that is not very pleasant. And so I think having an impact in that area is something that is very important to me.
Yeah. Is there what's the, I guess, reasoning behind the indications that you're targeting from the outset? So you're developing cancer vaccines and CAR-T therapies initially focused on breast and ovarian cancers. Why lead with those indications?
Well, those are two very big indications with big unmet needs. Breast cancer is the most common malignancy in women, and I believe it's number 2 in terms of the most common cancer overall in most societies. And ovarian cancer is one of those types of diseases that for which we do not have a lot of options. Many women who get ovarian cancer actually respond initially to the platinum drugs that are used, but very quickly go into resistance, and then often they pass away. And so highly unmet need, and it's something that everyone knows about. But the main reason we chose indications like that is because we found situations where technology that's been developed, that's been the subject of research for over a decade, we felt was ready for prime time, ready for commercialization, ready for clinical trials, and ready to make a difference. In terms of the vaccines, the ovarian cancer and the breast cancer vaccine, I think every physician will tell you that if you can prevent a disease, that's much better than waiting until the disease occurs and then try to treat that disease. And so we found a situation where some very innovative researchers at the Cleveland Clinic, which is one of the top hospital systems in the world, had developed these approaches to try and vaccinate women against contracting ovarian cancer and contracting breast cancer. And so we're very excited to be working with our partners there to take these technologies into clinical testing, and then we hope eventually into commercialization.
Yeah. And you recently launched the phase 1 trial of that breast cancer vaccine. Is that correct?
That's correct. The phase 1 trial has begun, and we've started dosing the first handful of patients, women who have decided to participate in our trial. And we're at the dose escalation stage right now. So what that means is we start out with a very low dose to evaluate safety, and we increase the dose gradually in successive participants in the trial until we get to a point where we feel we have the right dose that's appropriate for conducting the trial.
Okay. Now, a lot of our listeners are going to know, when you mention cancer vaccine, breast cancer vaccine, they're going to get it. Some of our listeners might not, because like right now, vaccines are in the news, they're in our kitchen table conversations for the past 2 years, but we're talking about, more traditional and non-traditional, but a more traditional approach to vaccinating against the virus. This is different. So explain for us, if you will, what a cancer vaccine, I guess, means theoretically, fundamentally, and then maybe talk specifically about your candidate.
Yeah, the area of cancer vaccine, the field of cancer vaccines is a little different than the traditional field of vaccines against infectious agents like SARS coronavirus or smallpox or polio. The area of, the field of cancer vaccines has been focused primarily on what is known as a therapeutic vaccine. That's a situation where a cancer has been diagnosed in a patient, and you try and induce an immune response against that cancer to try and treat that cancer. The challenge, and we've had about 3 or 4 decades of work in that area, and nothing has worked. Nothing has been successful. Mm-hmm. And the main reason, we believe, is because once a tumor has gained critical mass, that tumor is, comprised of trillions of cells. It's got a very immunosuppressive environment, known as the tumor microenvironment, and it's very hard for the immune system to battle that tumor. However, we believe that a more traditional vaccine, prophylactic or preventative vaccine, has some advantages. One of the advantages is that as cancer forms, it starts out as 1 aberrant cell, then it becomes 2, and then 4, 8, et cetera, eventually becoming a trillion cell mass. However, if we can destroy those cells at the 2, 4, 8 cell stage, then those cells will never be able to gain enough critical mass to become a tumor. And we believe that the immune system, if you can train it properly, is able to destroy those handfuls of cells much easier than after you've got trillions of cells. So our prophylactic vaccine is designed to target a specific protein that shows up on cancer cells. And we train the immune system before a woman, in the case of breast cancer, before a woman has those cells. And when those cells arise in some women at a later stage in life, we hope the immune system will destroy those cells. The animal studies demonstrated exceptional ability to prevent breast cancer, and we hope to prove that in human studies, which is what the subject of the clinical trials.
Okay, interesting. A follow-up question to that, just out of curiosity, and it may be way too early to answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. One of the again, in the daily and common conversations taking place around vaccine efficacy today, in terms of vaccines against infectious agents, the word durability comes up a lot, especially of late around the Omicron variant. The word durability comes up a lot, and timing, right? Timing is a very, very big consideration. So when you think about down the road, and again, it may be too early to respond to the question accurately, but when you think about down the road, the effective timing of of vaccination of a young woman, perhaps, and the durability of that protection. Do you have any anticipation at all as to what we might expect there?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And typically, it's very difficult to answer that question until you've actually monitored the people in the trial for some period of time. We expect that the durability of our vaccine is going to last a whole lifetime, but we won't know that until we actually do the studies and then follow the women for a period of time post vaccination.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Is there anything unique or interesting about the clinical trial itself that you'd like to? I mean, beyond the obvious, it's a unique and important and interesting trial as it is. But is any unique approaches to the trial that you're taking? Any particular challenges that you're currently working to overcome in terms of the trial?
Well, I think there are a couple of interesting approaches to this trial. In the phase 1 trial, we're going to have two segments. The first segment, we're focused on, of course, safety and looking at immune biomarkers. We want to see if we're inducing the immune system to target this protein that we've identified. And then we have a second segment of the phase 1 trial in which we are going to be monitoring breast tissue of women who have had prophylactic mastectomies. You may know that a lot of women that have mutations in their BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes often will have their breasts surgically removed even before they have cancer. Very, famous example of that was Angelina Jolie a few years ago, because she was a carrier of the mutations. She chose to have her breasts removed surgically rather than wait until she contracted breast cancer, because the probability of women who have those mutations of getting breast cancer and often the most aggressive form of breast cancer, known as triple negative breast cancer, is very high. So in our phase 1B study, we will not only be looking at immune markers to determine if we are inducing the immune system to do what we want it to do, but we'll also be having the breast tissue from these women that are having prophylactic mastectomies, and we'll be able to take a look at that. This is a type of study that ordinarily is never done in human beings. You can do these studies in animals because you can remove tissue easily, but in human beings you often can't, except in this particular situation where these women have decided that they want their mastectomies even before they have breast cancer. So we're going to be looking at healthy breast tissue, and we're going to be evaluating whether our vaccine is inducing changes in that breast tissue.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And give us a sense for what kind of volume of the vaccine you need to produce to meet the needs of this phase 1 clinical trial?
Well, the phase 1 is a very small trial. It's 18 to 24 women. So we anticipate that we'll be complete with the phase 1 by the third quarter of this year. The amount of material is relatively modest. We've got quite a bit of material already manufactured, bottled. It's ready to go at the appropriate pharmacy at the Cleveland Clinic.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so are you manufacturing that internally yourselves right now at that level?
No, we have a series of contract vendors that are all FDA approved, that are manufacturing, that are doing the analysis and a number of other things that are necessary before those materials can be injected into human beings. But there's a network of outside firms that are working with us on that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. You mentioned Cleveland Clinic. You guys are partnering with Cleveland Clinic and the Moffitt Center, and both very well known names in the space. Good company to be in, given the line of work you're in. Give us some color on how those partnerships came to pass.
Well, I think a number of factors were involved in both of those partnerships. In the case of Cleveland Clinic, I met one of their business people who was looking at evaluating partners for the vaccine technologies. And successive to that, I met the scientist, and we had some discussions, and we both had a similar vision for what we thought where these technologies could go. And so we were able to partner with them. In the case of Moffitt, that was a little bit different. The technology, the CAR-T technology that we were working on with Moffitt was developed at a place called the Wistar Institute, which is a basic research institute in Philadelphia on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. And we licensed the technology there. As it turns out, the inventor, the principal investigator at the Wistar Institute that developed the technology was going to be was moving and was going to become head of immunology at the Moffitt Cancer Center. And so after we licensed the technology from Wistar, we spoke with the Moffitt Cancer Center, and they decided that they would like to perform the preclinical, or I should say IND enabling, and then eventually the clinical trial at Moffitt Cancer Center, as Moffitt happens to be one of the top cell therapy facilities in the world. They've done clinical trials on virtually all of the approved cell therapies, as well as many cell therapy technologies that have not been successful. Mm-hmm. And so we were able to structure a partnership with Moffitt that enabled us to conduct a clinical trial there. And that clinical trial has not begun yet, but is on the verge of beginning. We anticipate within the next couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks.
So both the Cleveland Clinic and Moffitt partnerships are in relation to the CAR-T candidate, not the breast cancer vaccine?
No. The Cleveland Clinic technologies are both the breast cancer and the ovarian cancer vaccines. Okay. So the Cleveland Clinic is focused on the vaccines, which is they developed those vaccines, and they've been performing research on those two technologies for the last 10 years or so.
Gotcha.
Moffitt Cancer Center is the CAR-T cell therapy technology.
Right. Good. Yeah. Sorry, I missed that. Thanks for clarifying. So I want to learn more about the CAR-T approach. Let's shift gears and talk about that if you're game for a few minutes.
Sure.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start at the highest level. Explain the rationale at Anixa around targeting solid tumors with CAR-T therapy.
Well, as a lot of people in this field know, CAR-T therapy has done some pretty amazing things for certain leukemias and lymphomas, specifically leukemias and lymphomas related to B-cell disease. B-cell is a type of white blood cell. However, CAR-T, despite many approaches to address solid tumors, has not worked at all in any clinical setting. We've got lots of good animal studies showing CAR-T can address solid tumors, but no one has been able to make it work in human beings in any effective manner. Mm-hmm. And there are lots of theories about that. You mentioned some having to do with, trafficking and the tumor microenvironment and other things. We feel that there are certain nuances about this CAR-T technology that will make it successful in solid tumors. Of course, we have to prove it. The key point, there are 2 key points here with our technology. Number one, we're targeting a protein on ovaries that is very exclusive to the ovaries. That protein only exists on the ovary cells in women and on the testes in men. So when we target our CAR-T against the ovary cells, we don't anticipate that these cells, the white blood cells or CAR-T cells, are going to be targeting other cells, other organ systems in the body. And then the other key characteristic, which is something that was discovered over the last few years, is that much of the vasculature, the blood vessels within a tumor, often express this specific protein as well. So in our case, in the case of ovarian cancer, our CAR-T is going to attack the ovarian cells directly, the cancer cells, as well as healthy ovary cells. But it's also going to destroy the vasculature, disrupt the vasculature of these tumors. And by doing that, we're sort of destroying the tumor from the inside and destroying the tumor from the outside. And that's a mechanism, those are mechanisms of action that have never been seen in CAR-T technology. And so we just want to prove that out in human beings. And if we can do that, then we'll probably have the first CAR-T that is successful in a solid tumor indication.
When you're striving to excel in a new arena, the best guides are the ones already doing it well. The Business of Biotech brings those voices forward to help new and emerging biopharmas turn their innovations, like mRNA and cell and gene therapies, into clinical realities. Tune in and subscribe for insights on hiring, regulatory, and other need-to-know topics for biopharma leaders. The podcast is brought to you in collaboration with Cytiva. Check out their resources at cytiva.com/emerging biotech. That's CYTIVA.com/emerging biotech. Yeah. Okay. So that addresses the hope around that whole solid tumor challenge that's vexed the space for so long. But there are other challenges to CAR-T cell therapies that I'd like to kind of roll through with you and what your response to or approach to these challenges will be. One of them is supply. It's a challenge I think that everyone's facing right now, and regardless of modality. Supply chains are inbound. That is, inbound supply chains are maxed out and stressed. What's the approach been at Anixa? Now, granted, I know that you're preclinical. Even the breast cancer vaccine is a very limited clinical supply. But even for things that are required for testing and assays and experiments at Anixa, how are you overcoming supply chain challenges?
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and the whole pandemic and issues related to the pandemic have had impact on our technology, our progress, as well as the progress of other clinical trials. From a supply standpoint and a logistics standpoint, we've had challenges in obtaining certain types of materials occasionally, although we've been successful in getting those materials, but sometimes it's taken some time. In the case of outside vendors, often what we found is that those vendors have been impacted themselves regarding their supply chains, as well as their labor force. Their scientists and technicians have had to, because of the pandemic, have had to socially distance, and so a number of people that ordinarily would be in a laboratory has been reduced. They've had to work in shifts, and our researchers have had to do the same thing. And as a result, there have been delays in getting things done, unfortunately. And if our technologies work, every single day that that technology was delayed from getting to the market, to commercialization, means there are a certain number of patients that don't get the benefit. And so we're working very hard to address any supply chain issues and any other issues that will cause delays. Unfortunately, the the reality of the situation is that the pandemic has caused these delays, and we just have to deal with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about scalability? So again, you probably haven't faced any great big giant scalability tests yet, but maybe you can even look at some forward thinking thoughts around how you'll scale specifically CAR-T therapies, where that's been a challenge for so many companies.
Yeah, that's as you noted, we're starting out with a small number of patients, so scalability is not as big an issue as eventually it'll become. But there are a number of manufacturing organizations now that have formed to help build and scale cell therapy technologies. And a number of the big pharma companies have developed that capability internally as well. Our business plan is to develop these technologies to a point where we can partner with one of those larger pharma companies that already has the manufacturing infrastructure to be able to scale the manufacturing. At the current time, we're working with the Moffitt Cancer Center, and Moffitt has the ability to manufacture enough for the clinical trials, but eventually we hope this is going to be commercialized and it's going to be utilized for thousands and thousands of women that need the benefit that have ovarian cancer. And in order to do that, we're going to have to work with a larger pharma company that has the infrastructure to be able to scale rapidly.
Mm-hmm. When you say a larger pharma company, are you speaking specifically about perhaps like a commercial kind of big pharma company? Or are you referring to like a contract manufacturing organization?
We prefer a big pharmaceutical company, like a Novartis or Bristol Myers or someone like that. Primarily because not only will they have the infrastructure to scale and manufacture, but they'll also have the infrastructure to distribute, help commercialize the product. They've got the relationships with the appropriate physicians and hospitals. And CAR-T therapy, as you may know, is a very complex type of therapy. It involves removing T cells, white blood cells, specifically T cells from individual patients, and then genetically engineering them outside the body, expanding them, and then re-injecting them back into the body. And that's a 4 to 8 week process for every individual patient. And lots of logistics are involved. You've got to ship the material from the patient to the manufacturing site where all of the engineering and quality control occurs. Then you've got to ship that material back to the hospital where the patient then gets infused. So it's a very complex process. And organizations like some big pharma companies have become expert at that, and we would like to partner with one of those.
Yeah. What's your take? A side question? Excuse me. Just based on the logistical challenge, the 6 to 8 week paradigm. What's your take on the companies, the new and emerging CAR-T companies who are pursuing an on-site approach to extraction, engineering, and re-injection? Have you? I mean, I'm sure you've heard of like some of these companies that have, some pretty aggressive intentions to create an atmosphere, not unlike, same day kind of dialysis or next day CAR-T cell therapy administration. Do you think that's realistic?
Well, there are a number of ways, number of approaches that people are taking. One approach is to develop off-the-shelf CAR-Ts so that you don't have to remove an individual, patient by patient sample, and you have something off the shelf and you can just ship it to every hospital wherever the appropriate patient is. That has not led to any successes yet. And the approach that you noted about on-site CAR-T development, I think there's some aspects of that that could be valuable, but it's a very difficult, it's a very expensive process to develop develop multiple CAR-T engineering capabilities at hospitals. So you really can't go to 2,000 hospitals in the United States and have the ability to build CAR-T technology, build CAR-T products at every one of those hospitals. So then the question is, maybe you could do it at 200 or 20, and that might be realistic, but I think from a capital expenditure standpoint, the logistics and the practicality of that are very difficult. CAR-T itself is very expensive already, and then if you have to amortize the capital expense of having multiple manufacturing sites, as opposed to one central manufacturing site, I think it's just going to add to the expense. It'll improve the timing. So instead of maybe 6 weeks, it might be you can do it in about 4 or 5 weeks. But I don't think the value of saving a week or so for the capital expense is worth it. So I'm not sure that that's the right way to go strategically.
Yeah. Okay. I was just curious about that. I'm always interested in people's opinions on that because, as I said, it does sound like an aggressive goal. And some folks say, hey, that'll it'll actually create logistical efficiencies where, I think in the near term, it's more a redistribution of cost than it is a clear cut cost saving. Yeah. But on the logistics, outbound logistics note, I'm curious about the challenges that that any CAR-T manufacturer faces there and how you anticipate overcoming those. So, when I say outbound logistics, I mean that element of shipping and transportation of these cells to and fro the development center where their engineering is taking place, then back to the patient in the hospital. What are the considerations there, and how does Anixa plan to tackle those challenges?
Well, we've not had to deal with that at the current time, because right now our clinical trial is going to be a single site trial where the patients are at Moffitt, the manufacturer of their individual personalized CAR-Ts are going to be done at Moffitt. And so we don't have to worry about it. But eventually, you're right. There's going to be a central manufacturing facility where patients' cells are sent and they're genetically engineered and then eventually sent back to the hospital. As you noted, the outbound logistics are critical. Obviously, number one, you want to ship the material in a manner that you don't lose the material. You don't want to lose it in the mail, so to speak, because there's a lot of work that's been done on that, and that's very, very precious material that's been taken out of account. These are white blood cells that have been removed from a cancer patient. Secondly, you want to make sure that there's an appropriate cold chain, meaning these cells cannot be exposed to very harsh conditions. They have to be kept frozen. They've got to be kept frozen, and they have to be monitored so that at no time does the temperature come up. And so there are companies and technologies that have formed now that just do that. They take the material that has been genetically engineered at the manufacturing site and then take it to the hospital, to the patient's bedside effectively, essentially, in a manner that maintains the viability of the cells and that enables you to monitor those cells so that if something bad happens, if they come up to temperature, if that sample happens to sit on the tarmac, at a very high temperature, the monitoring system will tell you that. So you don't ever want to inject a patient with cells that have been damaged in some way. So This is a complex process that typically has not been dealt with by the pharma industry, but over the last 10 years or so, we've learned a lot, and the infrastructure to handle the outbound logistics has been built, and will continue to be scaled as CAR-T therapies become more and more common.
Yeah, excellent. What between now and the foray into the clinic for that ovarian CAR-T therapy, what needs to take place? What is Anixa? What does Dr. Kumar need to lead Anixa through to be prepared here when that takes place?
Well, at this point, it's mostly just what I would characterize as bureaucratic work. I don't want to indicate that it's not important, but we have various committees that have to review the final protocol and plan, IRB committees and internal committees at the Moffitt Cancer Center. There's a number of things that have to be done to verify that the clinical trial is being done properly as per the requirements of the FDA and as per other types of internal requirements at Moffitt. Because essentially a clinical trial is an experiment on human beings. And these are sick human beings that are going through a lot. And so before you can do that, not only do you have to make sure that the technology is viable, but there are a number of organizational, logistical, and ethical issues that have to be addressed. And so we're in the final stages of doing all of that. And we anticipate, as I noted, that will be happening in a matter of weeks. And after that, we'll recruit patients and begin the treatments.
Yeah. Any special considerations as the leader of the company around ushering your second candidate into an active clinical situation and what that means for the company itself, from a business standpoint, from an HR funding standpoint? I mean, does that, on the continuum of Anixa, do you recognize that as a significant point that requires any sort of, extra attention perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. We always want to build out a portfolio of technologies because we want, multiple shots on goal, so to speak. Mm-hmm. We feel that we're working on a number of different technologies which have very, very large commercial opportunities that'll have massive impact societally should they work in the clinical trials. But as many people know, in the world of biotech, a lot of these technologies, no matter how compelling the data is in animals, preclinical data, often they go into human beings and don't work as expected. And so typically a biotech company would like to have as many shots on goal as possible. At the current time, we have 4 shots on goal. 2 of those are, one is in the clinical trial, the second is about to begin a clinical trial. The other 2 are preclinical. But we're always thinking about what's next. And I'm not able to discuss the details about some of the other programs that we're looking at, but we are evaluating other programs to add to our portfolio.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you too about one of those, which I think it's public knowledge. If it's not, don't worry, we'll just we'll just edit this part out of the conversation. But you've got a COVID therapeutic in the pipeline. Is that something that you're able to talk about just briefly, since I brought COVID up earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. And COVID is a little different program than our other oncology programs. We decided to go down that path because in my previous company, I was the CEO of a company that was working on a number of infectious diseases, one of which was SARS coronavirus 1, which several years ago. We worked with the Department of Defense, and other government agencies to look at not only that particular virus, but other viruses that potentially could be utilized as biowarfare agents. Our goal was to try and avoid that. And so when coronavirus 2 appeared and created this pandemic, we felt that some of the approaches that were being taken were not the right approaches. So for example, when the pandemic arose, most companies looked at what they had on the shelves and tried to repurpose existing drugs to address the pandemic, the coronavirus. And most of those drugs failed. But we have now a couple of drugs. Remdesivir was the first. Paxlovid is another drug that has recently been authorized. And there's a drug from Merck as well. But all three of these compounds, these drugs, were repurposed from other viral diseases. What we decided is that a better approach would be what's occurred in the world of hepatitis and what's occurred in the world of HIV. Rather than repurpose existing drugs, let's try and understand in exquisite detail the structure and function of the machinery of this virus. So specifically the enzymes that make this virus work, and then target drugs against those enzymes. So start from scratch and develop basically compounds that address the specific enzymes of this virus, as opposed to trying to find something that has been tried against other viruses. And we feel that this approach is going to take a little longer, but ultimately yield a much more potent and safer drug therapeutic. And in fact, our initial research has demonstrated that we've identified some compounds that are more potent in vitro assays compared to the existing products that have already been authorized. So we believe that our compounds are going to be much more effective drugs, but they're still at an earlier stage of development. They're at the animal testing stage, right?
That's a small molecule candidate?
That's correct. It's a small molecule. The vision is for something that's room temperature stable, very inexpensive to manufacture, synthesize and manufacture, and can be taken orally. So they can be distributed across the world, including the third world, which doesn't have the ability to distribute vaccines at, cold chain vaccines, or, utilize expensive therapeutics.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it just speaks the diversity and the multiple shots on goal philosophy. You've got a CAR-T cell therapy and a couple of them. You've got cancer vaccines. You've got a small molecule. I mean, you guys are you're definitely spreading it out. Does it take anything? Just a couple more questions for you, Dr. Kumar. I know we're running short on time, but what would you say it takes as the leader of this company to enable or allow or facilitate, I guess would be the word, that level of breadth? Most companies, and you never want to peg yourself as most companies, right? But most companies, they pick a modality or perhaps an indication or two, and they just kind of run down that track. That diversity of modalities and approaches is kind of uncommon. How do you manage that? How do you facilitate it?
Well, we're building a company with a very unique business model. The traditional biotech company and biotech companies that I've run in the past, we've had large staffs. You build very expensive laboratories with expensive equipment, and you hire expensive scientists and physicians to do your research. And when you do that, you have to, you build a portfolio of products that are focused on one area. So for example, if we had built a very expensive infrastructure to develop cell therapy, CAR-T therapies, then all of our products would have to be in CAR-T. What we decided was we were going to execute a business model where we were not going to build that infrastructure internally. We were going to access that infrastructure by working with academic partners. So that enables us to work with the Cleveland Clinic on vaccines. They've got the research team there, they've got the physicians, they've got the ability to do the clinical trial there. So we work with a large number of people at the Cleveland Clinic. And by the way, these are people that ordinarily a biotech company could never even hire. These are world-class scientists at one of the top institutions in the world. And a lot of these scientists and physicians don't want to work in industry. They would rather work in academia. And so these are people that a biotech company, even if you were Merck, couldn't even hire. And then on the cell therapy side, which is very different technology than vaccines, we're able to also work in that area because we can work with another partner, in this case, Moffitt, that has the expertise and the infrastructure to do that. And then as we go forward with, in our COVID program, we work with an international team of people in Germany and Austria and Italy. Again, we've put together groups of people that have appropriate expertise to help us develop that technology. And as we go forward, if and when we add additional programs, we can add those programs in any area because our business model doesn't limit us due to the fact that we have not made the massive investment in one particular scientific focus. Mm-hmm. So, we'll be looking at other programs that are very, very orthogonal or different from the programs that we're working on right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like I got to open up a whole new set of questions around that. I'm going to ask one of them, and then I'm going to let you off the hook. I promise this time. I know okay. I've held you for quite a while, but how does that approach affect your fundraising and financing approach? Obviously, you go out there with a very concerted. If you go out there, I should say, with a very concerted approach, maybe single modality, maybe single indication, you may appeal to a certain set of investors, a certain set of people in the investment community who are rooted in or invested in that indication or that modality. Does it take a different sort of investment mentality to go out there and find folks who are appreciative of the not just many shots on goal, but extremely broad indication and approach theory that Anixa subscribes to?
Yeah, I think this is a very attractive approach because it doesn't require as much capital as a typical biotech company. Mm-hmm. We still have to spend money, but because we're not building that infrastructure and have that fixed cost, we're able to access that through these partnerships that I've noted. We're able to spend a little bit less money and work on multiple projects. Ultimately, for a biotech company, especially a biotech company like ours, which is developing new and innovative technologies, the investors are going to be interested in the results. They're going to want to see how the clinical trials are going. Are we seeing what we expect to see, or are we not seeing what we expect to see? Statistically, are we getting the data that indicates that these products that we're developing are going to work on a larger scale? And those are the things that any investor, regardless of what the business model is going to want to see. And that's what's going to drive the success of the company. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, like I said, I appreciate the time that you've given me, Dr. Kumar. I know I've pushed the limits here, but it's been I appreciate the fact that you're willing to come on and entertain my broad and perhaps unorganized line of questioning.
Thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, so did I. Thanks for joining us. We'll be paying attention. It's super great work that you guys are doing. It's very important work. Obviously, like you said, it affects at some point everyone, and we'll continue to pay attention and hopefully have an opportunity to huddle up with you again when we've got some good clinical news to share.
Sounds great. I look forward to it.
So that's Anixa Biosciences, Dr. Amit Kumar. I'm Matt Pillar, and this is the Business of Biotech. We're produced by Bioprocess Online, which I encourage you to visit at bioprocessonline.com and sign up for my newsletter while you're there. We do this in partnership with Cytiva, which demonstrates its commitment to biotech startups by way of its Emerging Biotech Accelerator at cytivalifesciences.com/emerging biotech. Please check that out. Subscribe to the pod and give us a review if you like what you're hearing. And as always, thanks for listening.